welcome to Fulfilling the Commitments, Beijing Plus 25, the free online courses being held by UN Women, ParlAmericas, and the University of the West Indies Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the Dame Nita Barrow unit, which is based at Cave Hill campus. Today we're looking at Module 4, which is being led by Dr. Maya Trotz, and we're looking at women and the environment. Just a reminder what the objectives of the session are. The session's objectives are to identify what international commitments and jurisprudence where relevant is in relation to the assigned theme, to assess progress to date and look at what the outstanding critical issues are in order for us to be able to arrive at a Caribbean position in relation to negotiating around these issues at Beijing Plus 25, which will be held at the CSW meeting in March in New York, as well as at the regional meeting that will be held hopefully in Chile, given the political situation right now in Chile. Let's hope that meeting still will be happening, to ensure that we are negotiating from a position, an informed position as a CARICOM bloc, rather than individual states feeling the need to have to negotiate on their behalf because of a lack of a shared understanding. So Dr. Trotz this morning has asked for you, if you're interested and you want to ask questions, to please interrupt her session and ask those questions. You can do so by unmuting your mic and speaking, or by typing into the conversation chat section, and that way she'll be able to see your question and respond to it. She'd like this to be as innovative as possible and as participatory as possible. And just so that you know a bit about the person who is leading the session today, Dr. Trotz is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of South Florida. Her students are currently investigating reef and marine-inspired land-based solutions that include green infrastructure for storm water management and resource recovery from municipal and on-site wastewater in Tampa, Belize, and Barbados. She currently directs Strong Coast, a collaborative National Science Foundation National Research Traineeship Program with the University of the Virgin Islands to foster food, energy, and water solutions for coastal communities. Professor Trotz has led NSF, Environmental Protection Agency, and Department of Education grants that support undergraduate researchers, graduate students, K-12 teachers, and community organizations. Since 2015, she has offered a Water and Women workshop at the Caribbean Institute in Gender and Development, which is actually also hosted at IGDS Dame Nita Barrow unit. Dr. Trott also leads a USF team on the knowledge management component of the Green Climate Fund project awarded to the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center for the Barbados Water Authority, called Water Sector Resilience Nexus for Sustainability in Barbados. She's a past president of the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors and sits on the board of Fragments of Hope Corp., an NGO committed to coral restoration in Belize. Professor Trotz holds a BS in Chemical Engineering with a minor in Theatre Arts from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I like that. And an MS and PhD degrees in Environmental Engineering from Stanford University. She's a 2019 to 2020 Fellow of the Drexel University's Executive Leadership in Academic Technology, Engineering, and Science program. So if we're ever looking for women in STEM and women leading in STEM, I hope all of you know where to find them, and also, of course, that Dr. Trotz is one of those fantastic women doing incredible work for the Caribbean and globally on this issue around women in the environment. So without further ado, Maya, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Tani, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank all of the sponsors for putting this workshop on, this webinar on, and hopefully it could deliver some important information on women in the environment. I thought before we move on, and that hopefully there's a way that folks can either answer in the chat or respond via unmuting themselves. But I was at a Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association conference last week and on a panel talking about mainstreaming gender into the water sector. And there was a presenter talking about roles and physical attributes of women. And the comment the person made was that for sanitation workers who have to lift, a 55-gallon drum of trash from outside someone's home, that person is more likely going to be a man because women cannot lift that 55-gallon drum. And so when we're speaking about mainstreaming and looking at how women engage in services that are related to our environment, there's huge problems dealing with trash right now throughout the Caribbean, whether it's our plastic waste or any waste. These are jobs that help to protect not just the environment, but our health. So I just want to throw it out there. One, do you agree with that comment that women cannot participate in that activity of sanitation services because they are ill-equipped to lift a 55-gallon drum onto the trucks that we have? And two, is that a solid reason for keeping women out of that activity? So if I could just get one or two responses. Is that a reason why we should not have, or that if I'm a solid waste manager, that I would not look at my workforce and think, it's a problem if they're all men, because only men can lift those large garbage bins that we have in our communities?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, this is Michelle from Belize. How are you, Maya?
Hi, Michelle. I'm great.
Good. I definitely feel that maybe the sanitation portion, or how we look at sanitation, is probably one of those frontiers that people do believe that women are not able to participate in. I remember we do a program by the name of Gender Awareness Safe School in Belize to the Women's Department, and going to a classroom and having the children, definitely they were convinced that the one area that women or girls could not participate in was the garbage pick up or clean up. But I think this is where you see probably structures and systems that continue to foster a bias as it relates to entire policy and the way things are done, because women are definitely on the forefront of sanitation in their homes. They have to ensure that, given the responsibility of families, that the area is kept clean. They are the ones who, make sure that everything is on par. But the issue of muscles, or how women lift weight, and how we teach our girls and our boys differently as it relates to sanitation, definitely have a bias of socialization in there. For example, I would say, well, not all men, for example, could lift up 55 gallons drum either. So certain people who have that strength can. And so it's not only an issue of women being able to lift that, but also, like I said before, men also. So sometimes we have to look at how then do we make systems. Why does it have to be 55 gallons? It could be smaller, for example, or you have smaller container. Are there other roles that women can play in ensuring sanitation that sometimes, and it's not a bias, because some women can certainly lift up 55 gallons and some men cannot lift up 55 gallons. So it's not about being a woman or a man, but it's just about understanding how these processes would affect the way we are socialized and the way we view each other. Thank you.
Michelle, that's perfect and that's excellent. I think that's critical. The point is, why would we want anyone to be lifting a heavy 55-gallon, container? Whether the person is male, female, it probably is serious stress on your back and probably unhealthy. And it may be one of the reasons why, in keeping the same size container, we might look to engineering to try and come up with a system that actually automates that process so a person doesn't even have to lift it. You mentioned looking at a smaller container size. Another great solution. Why not make it something that's safer for everyone? One can also think of things like, well, if 60% or more of our waste is actually compostable, who has the company that actually brings into every resident, every residence, a system that can compost the waste, so that the waste that has to go to the landfill is only, is reduced by 60%. So I just wanted to share that, and I think it was great that Michelle brought those up. There were two other comments that were in the chat, and I wanted to bring that example up because I think it's about how we start to think differently about the systems that are in place, and that we need to start questioning everything. Some things may be working and some things may not be working, but we must always come with things, especially as we approach solutions that are more in the field I'm in, civil and environmental engineering, that more or less have come about when not many of us were at the table actually, one, identifying the problem, and two, helping to come up with a solution. And so I just wanted to use that to, get into the presentation I'm about to make, which hopefully will let us think more about what this women and environment looks like for the Caribbean as we go forward to CSW 20. So I sort of did a word cloud looking at the Beijing Declaration, a platform for action, and just went to the sections that were on the environment. And some of the topics that, popped out, were dealing with development and this natural world. Some of the topics that are on here that I'll highlight today emphasize water. We talked about waste just now, fisheries in terms of food, rural areas. And if it's interesting, because back in 1990, we weren't necessarily, I didn't see like climate come out in this here. And so I started to look through some of the national reports that the Caribbean countries, nations have submitted to UN Women. And of the ones that I could find, I did the same word cloud on these. This is not any scientific approach to doing them, as I didn't screen the text properly. So, but, sorry, it's evident that the country reports definitely are now emphasizing things like climate change, disaster, resilience. We see that in particular coming out of Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada. These three countries actually have green climate funds right now. I put up ones for Guyana where we see things on agriculture being important. I was just in St. Kitts and Nevis, and examples that they included also have agriculture and this link to educational examples that some of their schools are showing. So what we're seeing is sort of from the country reports that I went through, I thought the parts that were written on women and the environment miss a lot of what women are actually doing in, with, and for the environment in the region. And I'm not sure how those sections are put together. But what I wanted to do in this presentation was use examples of people I've met and stories that I know about to show how these things are all interconnected, and we could actually make a much stronger case for what women and the environment looks like in our documentation and how we move forward. The way to a lot of the work that we do right now in my program talks about systems thinking, and Michelle just was clear in how she described it just now, in terms of, well, you could reduce the size of the bin so that you get, potentially more people to access that job, and then because the size of the bin is lower, you actually may have less risk to injury, right? So it's how things are interconnected. I think you might have to close your chat screen so that you could see this whole page here. But what this is what my colleagues in the department sort of put together, looking at how water and sanitation links to all of the different sustainable development goals. And so these are sort of called causal loops diagrams, and I'm going to bring up a few more as we go on. So I'll just use one example to show what these arrows and signs mean. So let's say we looked at this part here. Can you see my, oh yes, you could see my mouse. So let's say we're talking about resilient infrastructure. And we see this arrow with a plus sign. What it means is that if the resilient infrastructure increases, then what it's going to will also increase. So resilient infrastructure increases means available water and sanitation should also increase. If instead we had a negative sign, let me see if I could find one on here. Not seeing too many. Okay, so if we go up towards the top, what a negative sign means is that the two things go in opposite directions. So here we have from conservation projects, I'm up at the top here, conservation projects and the link to natural resource depletion. And there's a negative sign there because it means that if I increase my conservation projects, then I should decrease my natural resource depletion. Or if I decrease conservation projects, then the natural resource depletion rate should increase. So all this to say is that when we think in systems and we start to look at how things are linked to each other, and using the SDGs as a framework, I think is great for how we think of where the environment plays a role in, and where the environment and how women play a role in meeting the SDGs. We can actually sort of look at how they're all pretty much interconnected. And I'm going to do a lot of that in this discussion. I think in one of the documents that I was sent on a Caribbean paper on women in on the Beijing plus 25, water and sanitation was sort of on a line of its own, and so I'm probably going to spend a little time talking about water and what we are seeing in the region as things that are linking, you know, women and water. And another mention, when we talk about gender equality for the SDGs, one of the things that is emphasized, I think for Latin America and the Caribbean, the rates are 2 to 8 times more, the amount of women's work for women, the amount of women that are unpaid for their caregiving and domestic work, the ratio of the value of that to men's labor. So for people who are doing caregiving and domestic work, those all require access to water and access to sanitation, require that you have food to provide for that service. And so I'm going to spend a little time in showing how this food waste and water are linked. These videos, and I apologize for this, I have a lot of videos in this presentation, and they're not going to come across in high definition as you look at them. I have a Google Drive with the presentation and all of the videos that if you're interested, I'm sure UN Women can share that with you. So I'll try and play the videos, and in the chat, if it becomes too difficult for you to hear, the video quality might be low, but let me know if you cannot hear, and I'll just move to the next one. I think I saw Farmala log on. Oh, she's left the meeting. She was on earlier, but I met her actually at a CGAD 2017 workshop. So let me play this one.
My name is Pamela Jacobs, and Executive Director for the Directorate of Gender Affairs in Antigua and Barbados.
In terms of your work, how is water really utilized, or is it even considered in your daily operations?
In terms of our use of water, we conduct a lot of training and awareness building activities where we would normally waters to persons who participate. We've also recently launched our Sexual and Assault Referral Center. And within that center, we provide water to our clients, persons who might experience any form of violence. So we provide water. Also recently installed a shower into our center, so persons who experience sexual assault could also come and take a shower after they've been medically examined. So those are the key areas in which we utilize water within our office space.
Good morning. Good morning. Could you tell me your name, where you're from, and tell me how water impacts on the work that you do, or even if it doesn't at this point, how do you see any potential for your work on water?
Thank you for your question. My name is Sarah Ann Gresham, and I am a research officer at the Directorate of Gender Affairs in Antigua and Barbuda. Just to reiterate what my colleague said previously in another interview, we recently set up a sexual assault and referral center, so water plays a big factor in the provision of our services. But in addition, in my capacity as research officer, I am very interested in exploring how water is important, especially with regard to disaster management programs, and gender needs to be mainstreamed into those programs. So that is an area that I'm very interested in exploring in the future.
I had a question for you. So in Antigua, you guys have a lot of decentralized water treatment at the house and so on. Are a lot of women employed in putting those systems in place?
As far as I know, no. It's a very male-dominated activity. But I do know that in a lot of female-headed households, women do have water tanks, and they also know how to treat the water. So, for example, in my personal experience, my mother, who's the head of our household, she has to treat the water because she makes local drinks. And I know that there are women who sell groceries on the side of the streets who also have their water tanks as well. But that is an area that, the Directorate of Gender Affairs can look into in ensuring that women become part of the process.
So from what Sarah was saying just now, her mom treats the water. That's what we would, one of the areas we would call, for environmental engineering. A large portion of our work deals with water treatment. I'll play another one from St. Lucia.
The initiative I work with also has a prime responsibility for disaster and responding in terms of disaster, looking at relief and supplies. So for us, it has to do with working with families who may be displaced, having them have access to clean water, making the water available to them as well, and also taking into consideration response workers as well, having them have water available there for drinking purposes, for bathing as well. In times of disaster, we work a lot with the Red Cross and BWS to some extent in terms of regaining water supply in terms of disaster, at times of disaster.
And during times of disaster, the people employed for many of the provisions of water and food, is it men or women? Or
majority men, sad to say.
I have one more from CGAD, and this is from Jamaica.
Water is important to the intersex as well as the transgender. Why? Because when they do come out, knowing that in Jamaica it is an abomination, when they do decide to come out, they're left homeless.
Jamaica is a homophobic society. We grew up to dislike homosexuality.
Homosexuality in Jamaica don't have any hope. It's just no. Never gonna happen. They're gonna kill us faster.
So they have to succumb to either the gully or prostitution. And when you're doing prostituting, you need to do your wash up, basically. So water is that essential that is used for the wash up session. And knowing that they live in the gully, you know, it's contaminated, have different viruses, bacteria, and then when they do get a bacteria or virus and they go to seek medical attention, then it's then a issue again. They're denied the attention maybe. So water to me is very important to them. So I want to create awareness for that.
So those three examples talk about sexual violence and safe spaces, disaster recovery, LGBTQ rights, which when you read the documents from the Caribbean tend to have a lot more information than, say, when you look at components that deal with women and environment, right?
Water,
but the things are obviously linked. I won't play this whole one, but this is an example from Haiti, and I'm not sure if we have anyone from Haiti online, but this deals with sanitation. Now, in the Caribbean, less than 15% of the region actually is on any type of centralized wastewater treatment system. Not that that is the end all and be all for wastewater treatment, because in many times those things fail. Many places may be on septic systems or on suck wells, which is just a hole in the ground. For many that live really close to the coast, this tends to be problematic, and we'll talk about this a little later on, because of its impact on our nearshore and reef environment. Not only that, but also on our health. This example from Haiti actually looks at a very innovative way in which women and men are recovering resources from waste so that they can actually restore natural habitat where trees have been lost.
In Haiti, over 99% of human waste goes untreated, with devastating consequences for both the environment and public health. In 2006, I co-founded Soil with a mission to really simultaneously solve the problems of poor sanitation and declining soil fertility by closing the nutrient cycle and using the nutrients from human waste to restore soil fertility. So what we do at Soil is that we've designed a small portable household toilet, which people rent for about $4 to $5 US per month per family. And the toilet has a 5-gallon bucket in it, filled with a carbon material that's used for flushing. And once the bucket is full, we take it away to our compost site where it is treated and transformed. It's a very simple process in which we just dump the waste into a bin, and then we step back and we let the soil microbes do their work. And when there's so many of them in there, it actually heats up the waste to a really high temperature, which kills all of the pathogens that make people ill. And in 6 to 9 months, we have an amazing finished product that can go back onto farms to restore soil fertility without having to rely on chemical fertilizers, which take a tremendous amount of fossil fuel to produce. Soil started our household toilet program, which is called Eco Lakai, in 2013. And we currently have about 5,000 people using our household eco-sand toilets. And from these families, we're treating 30 tons of human waste every month and producing between 5 and 10 tons of compost that we can then sell at the compost site.
Dans zone avoisinage tout, où jeune en pile monde ta comme ça tout, qui gagne caillou construire ou pas gagne toilette. Et les comme ça, yo même c'est aller dans la mer, aller dans base caillou cap construire, faire besoin dans sachet et puis voyer ailleurs. Ça distribue maladie, pas malade, pas malade. Mais l'homme qui fait tout ça, on a une l'eau dans la réserve, me laver même, et puis me couvrir, et puis la paix.
The soil's work is to really create a sustainable business model for sanitation.
I'm gonna stop that one there. I just want to say that, you know, if you're in, let's say Barbados, for example, they have a large desal plant that actually takes water from, you know, close to the coast where the water is brackish. Further up in the watershed, the majority of people actually are either on septic or suck wells. A suck well is pretty much a hole in the ground. So that pretty much drains to the lowest part of town, which ends up being along the coast. And so Ionics is pretty much tapping into an aquifer that is receiving water of, you know, waste that is trickled through from the houses further up in the watershed. They do some fancy treatment and you have pretty clean water to drink. So what we saw with soil is sort of in your face, you know, you're taking a bucket from your toilet and turning that into compost. And in other places where the centralized system is managing that, we may be more far removed, but we're still sort of, in a sense, reusing someone's waste. Just wanted to put that out there. So this issue of wastewater links very clearly to like SDG 14, life below water. And what I'm showing here is the same sort of causal loop diagram that was based on a system at, say, Laughing Bird Key National Park in Belize. From information, this comes from two students at USF, Daniel Delgado and Alex Webb, who were asked to sort of like start to put together what these causal loop diagrams look like when I took a class there earlier this summer. So let's take an example like wastewater that we were just looking at, right? You increase the amount of wastewater produced. That increases the amount of nutrients you might have in your system, right? Which inevitably ends up increasing the nutrient loads to effluent water bodies like your sea. When the nutrient loads increase in the sea, they can have an impact of increasing algae, because algae like the nutrients to grow. When algae, the amount of algae increases, you tend to see a decrease in coral cover as they start to smother and the corals. And inevitably, when you have a decrease in coral cover, you end up having no spaces for fish to hide and breed. And so you end up decreasing your fish, the amount of fish available, right? So you'll normally have a slogan, more coral, more fish. And I'll talk more about coral restoration efforts and what women in Belize and Jamaica, actually many women around the Caribbean region, are dealing with as they address coral restoration or trying to bring the reef environments back. But those are very linked to what we do on land, how we treat our wastewater, whose wastewater are we treating as we grow our tourism economy. We have more tourists to deal with. More tourists means more wastewater to put in our system. So these things are all interconnected. So here's a video from Belize that was done for COP23.
In Belize, women divers receive training on marine tourism and lagoon ecology. These divers restore coral reef habitats, which protect the shorelines and marine life.
At Fragments of Hope, our main focus has been coral restoration or coral replenishment. Anywhere you have coral reefs, they are affected by climate change. This is due directly to increased sea surface temperatures, which causes bleaching events, and now has also been linked to coral disease. So what we do is map all the existing healthy corals, and then we grow them in the nursery so we have them in abundance. And the main thrust of our work is that we are then outplanting multiple individuals of each species on the shallow reefs.
In a community where it used to only be like men fishermen and the women weren't really allowed to go as girls, even go out fishing really much, to show that we can do something and we can make a difference out here. We're so proud of what we're doing and we see really good results.
At Laughingburg Key National Park, which is where the restoration work began and still continues, we have replenished over a hectare, which is over 100,000 square feet of shallow reef.
I feel like Superwoman in a way. Yeah, like you're doing wonders.
Next up, we have from Belize. This women-led diving program restores coral reef habitats, contributing to shoreline protection. Please welcome Fragments of Hope. In Belize.
So I had an opportunity to actually go with Fragments of Hope to Jamaica, and I was actually in Belize when the Jamaicans came to visit their site. So in the documents talking in dealing with women in water, and also in the SDGs, there are discussions on the need for partnerships, sharing of knowledge, and I think this is just a great example of what's going on in the coral restoration world. That I didn't necessarily see reflected in the national reports that were submitted. I actually can't remember. I don't think Belize submitted one. I'm sure if they did, they would probably have a strong presence from women in the marine area, not just Fragments of Hope, but think places like Oceana Belize, Sea Belize, lots of different organizations there with strong women as leaders. So here's Jerlene from Jamaica.
My name is Jerlene Lane. I am the manager of the Sandals Boscobel Special Fishery Conservation Area in Boscobel, St. Mary, Jamaica. I was born in Port Antonio, but I now live in St. Mary. I am from the parish of St. Mary Boscobel. Well, managing fish sanctuary entails actually having to deal with the main stakeholders, which are fisher folk, getting the fisher folk organized, getting persons to comply to the rules and regulations of a special fishery conservation area. It entails education, public education and outreach, because if persons aren't aware of what it is they're dealing with, then they won't accept change as willingly. Once they're aware, then persons tend to gravitate more toward what it is we're trying to do. So the public education is, it's not possible. Basically, for a conservation area, it's a no-take zone. So what we do, we prevent persons from fishing the area with a flora or fauna, whichever it might be. So no-take zone, nothing is removed. So enforcement by way of patrols, sometimes it's hard enforcement, sometimes it's soft enforcement. It all depends on the situation. So managing a fish sanctuary entails a lot of things. It's a symbiotic relationship between coral and fish. Without the fish, one can't live without each other. So we're trying our very best to replenish the devastated reef in our area. And my name.
And I'll move to the next one. So at the end of that, Geraldine actually talks about how great it was to go and share with Belize. But she talked just now that fish and coral can't live without each other. And I'll give an example here from from Barbados. So when we start to think of, the work that women are doing that are interlinked directly with the environment, this impacts livelihoods in a different way in which it affects our food production. This is a video made from faculty and students at the University of the West Indies at Cape Hill.
My name is Melanie Holder. I've been working in the Ministry of Agriculture approximately 37 years. Basically everything but one child. Over the years, I feel very highly about the contribution that I've contributed to the government of Barbados because as being an inspector, you provide, make sure that the public get wholesome food, which is from the farm to the plate. I would like to the vendors, especially in the fishing industry, to think higher of themselves because they are providing a very important final product to the consumer, which is fish, and then they think higher of themselves, put up the self-esteem, and know that they are a business person. They're just not at the end of the ladder because they are who provide for the consumer, and that is very important.
Here's another systems diagram talking about life below water, and it looks at gender and tourism. It was put together by one of our graduate students, Michelle Platts, and a colleague, Dr. Christy Prouty, and Dr. Rebecca Zarger. So when we're talking about the conservation that we saw Fragments of Hope and Sandals Foundation speak about just now, we might think of how is gender playing a role in that, and how are the organizations that are pushing the conservation, how are they helping to empower women so that they can actually be employed in this tourism, tour guiding industry that also is increasing conservation of our natural resources. I must say that working with Fragments of Hope and many probably of the organizations that I find tend to be led by women that are supporting more conservation in the Caribbean are smaller organizations asked to, because they're having such an impact on their communities and showing such success, they do have a challenge in terms of fundraising. Many of our organizations that donate to these organizations or give grants tend to have many reporting requirements. And this is some work that we've been doing with Fragments of Hope in terms of looking at the funds that they've received, where those funds have gone. You know, is it funding the women who are participating in the program, the men? Is it the boaters? It tends to be the persons who own the boat make more. The persons who are going to do the websites and so on, who live in the city and not more in the rural area, make more money. So starting to parse through that information and then really start to think, well, what makes sense for these coastal communities if we're looking at money, and what are the investments needed in those communities to build those skills so that some of that wealth is actually retained, say, in the more rural areas. At the end of the day, it is money that is kept within Belize, but when you start to look at differences, say, between rural and city folks, many of these grants, say, might require a video, and they fly in someone to make the video, and that person actually gets paid a lot more than the persons who are actually restoring the coral. But I'll show this example from Fragments of Hope again, because it talks about how gender was addressed by the organization, or is being addressed by the organization.
This GP is unique because of the participation and capacity building of people, particularly champions and advocates for environmental protection and sustainable development.
When we put people first and then provide the tools and create that enabling environment, people are moved to action and can do great things.
Climate change is one of the largest threats to coral reef health, causing more frequent and severe storms, as well as coral bleaching and diseases.
These corals were in abundance when we were kids growing up. Now there's so many dead skeletons. We get out there and we restore the reef by planting new corals and have made Laughing Bird this beautiful, beautiful island once again.
Women have an ingrained nurturing attitude towards our natural resources. We understand a lot of working moms don't have the same availability, so we try to spread our courses out over the evenings and weekends to accommodate women.
It's been a big struggle as a single mom trying to make ends meet. I am very grateful and privileged for the opportunity for the Belize Tourism Training Program. It's a life-changing experience, having better opportunities to put food on the table, also getting more involved with the environment.
Fragments of Hope was recently internationally recognized by the United Nations Secretariat for Climate Change, so it's very exciting to get international recognition and attention since we've been doing this work for so many years.
It's made me feel like tour guiding and being a part of Fragments of Hope. It was all worth it. I mean, totally worth it.
I'll skip this side because Lisa just mentioned, the impact of climate change on the corals, and unfortunately, the corals in southern Belize, some are bleaching right now, as they are across the Caribbean region and other parts of the world, due to the high temperatures in our seas. Corals are also used, corals and mangroves are also linked to climate change because your strong and large coral reef tends to do assist with flood control and storm surge. So if you have a dead reef, you likely are not going to reap the benefits of having a healthy coral reef. Of course, if it's a Cat 5 or 4, a large storm, it will turn and probably totally devastate your reef. But this issue of storm surge and increased storm intensity, increased intensities of our hurricanes that we've seen in the region a lot, especially recently with Dorian just hitting the Bahamas so hard. This video, I'm not going to play it because the quality that I have uploaded here is not great and the videos are not coming through very well on the presentation, but it's a great piece that asks the question of why Cuba is 15 times less, why Cubans are less likely to die from hurricanes than in the US. And it talks about things that Cuba has been doing to address this issue and to build their resilience, which really stems from the commitment that they're committed to saving lives. So this idea of evacuation, they talk about ingrained from very young, this understanding of the risk that you live with, and being trained to respond in a sensible way when that risk or that threat is increased. And so it's a wonderful video, and I'm just going to skip it just because the quality is not great, but that's the gist of what it talks about. And then this one is of high quality, and it talks about Guyana. And Tanya, you could correct me, but I don't think I saw a report from Cuba either, a national report as yet on the website. But here's an example from Guyana where we don't have reefs. We do have mangroves. Some are there, some are not. But it's about recent problems that we've had on the coast dealing with storm surge and flooding and failing infrastructure for a community that is living in a very risk-prone area. So the video isn't, it's losing its effect because you're not seeing it clearly. But the gist of it is that this woman is running along the seawall, which she normally does, and then there's this point in time when the realization that, yeah, Guyana is built below sea level, and the sea is stormed, the surge is high, and how vulnerable we are to living in such an environment. So I'll just stop that there. And this is something that was, I think, produced this year by Real Guyana. And there's been flooding in parts of Guyana due to things like this and the failing infrastructure just this year alone, if not more recent. I won't play this video, but I'll talk a lot about, or I'll talk a little more about this project. So this is the Water Sector Resilience Nexus for Barbados. It's something that I've worked on and I'm working on, where the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, this is the first Green Climate Fund project that they got funded as an accredited entity. The implementing agency is the Barbados Water Authority and the government of Barbados. Partners are the University of the West Indies, the University of South Florida, and we're trying to, with the universities, start to build this university utility partnership, something that we're seeing in other places around the world where they recognize how important and critical this is for sustainable utilities. And the project includes integration of renewable energy into the pumping stations at the Water Authority. I'm actually just going to show in the background here, we see the Ellerton pumping station. And I'll just mention that because there's been lots of discussion on historical buildings, and in Barbados in particular of recent, and many of their sites tend to be older. So this PV system is at Bowmanston, which I think is the first place water was pumped from in Barbados. And Ellerton is not in a great state, but it's also a gorgeous building that could or should be restored if possible. But the project not just includes the integration of renewable energy, it addresses a revolving adaptation fund, which Minister Cattle speaks about. Maybe I'll just jump to this part.
Thank you very much. This project comes importantly built on many years of work and research. It comes to deliver to people in their everyday lives. And one of the components of the project that I was particularly interested in seeing when I came to service as Minister in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, the ministry which manages the government's public sector investment program, and so many of these large infrastructure projects, was the RAFF, which is the Revolving Adaptation Fund. Because one of the things we have to be able to deliver to households in Barbados and to other sectors of the community is the wherewithal to be able to address for themselves issues of water supply and sustainability and climate resilience. So on reviewing the project, and I have to say that I'm not surprised that Dr. Gadaden is not working as a consultant in the 5Cs on the project, having worked on the other side in BWA, because a lot of the work that has gone into this and a lot of the attention has really been about making sure that we get beyond the climate science and the argument, and we're able to develop something that delivers for people. And I want to congratulate you all on having been able to conceptualize that.
So this is a grant. So it's not really for large infrastructural projects, but it allows the BWA to sort of promote more rainwater harvesting, put some of those systems in at vulnerable households. I'll just stop here, put back to a picture with more women in it. I'll leave it with the minister. But so it includes a component to boost rainwater harvesting, to clean some of the infiltration wells, to help replenish some of the aquifers. It also includes components for water storage systems, which many other Caribbean countries may have implemented already. Barbados, it's sort of a more recent occurrence due to low water pressure or sometimes lack of water from the utility. So they actually came up with a system to put in tanks that take BWA water and cycle it, use it through the house. So you always have a storage of about 400 gallons on site. The project has a gender action, all GCF projects have to do gender assessment and come up with a gender action plan. And I'll just give a story on that. Something that happened 2 weeks ago. We were doing an Envision training course. And Envision is a sustainability certification for infrastructure. So it's for engineers and for civil engineers and designers to say, maybe the way we built our roads, or that we built it without consulting communities to know that there were burial sites where the roads were going, or that we built our wastewater treatment plant in places and close to communities and moved people from places that they were very attached and have significant cultural and historical and social significance. Maybe we need to do it better. And Envision is sort of this new approach that is trying to make folks see that there are ways in which we can build our infrastructure and develop and design and identify what infrastructure is needed through strong partnerships, consultations, engagement with stakeholders throughout the entire process of design, construction, operation. And so we held this workshop in Barbados, and I was going through the numbers, and the Gender Action Plan actually says that for all the various capacity building exercises, we need to show equal participation of men and women. Now, when you look at the engineering or the technical roles that people are playing in Barbados as it relates to water, and let's say we're not including that homeowner, that woman who is actually putting in the entire treatment system in our home and is really quite technical or really engaged in the provision of water. Let's say we're just looking at, the engineers who are part of the engineering community or part of BWA. Are we going to meet those targets of having equal participation? And if not, how do we actually find others who are as interested and as equipped to contribute to the design of these things that could bring some gender balance into at least some of the training and capacity building? So that's just something that I am personally dealing with as I embark on this project for water provision. The project actually includes the development of a gender and infrastructure certificate. This should be done with the Institute for Gender Development Studies, the Nita Barrow unit at Cavell campus. And that gender and infrastructure certificate, the idea is that everyone in the Barbados Water Authority should go through certification. And that's something that IGDS will have to work with the BWA and myself and others in developing. What does that certificate look like? I should mention that infrastructure right now in the region, whether it's your roads, your water plants, your wastewater treatment plants, will be getting or is getting the most significant amount of funding in the region. And whether women are playing a role in that, is we need the data to show the discrepancies where the jobs are going. Because if this is bringing in the most money and women are not participating, especially in the things that are getting the most money, then it's problematic, and we have to think of what our training looks like. So for example, the project will be putting in PV systems, photovoltaic systems. Who are the engineers with the organizations or the companies? What do they look like? What does the demographic look like? Do we say that it's just okay that women could be included because they will help to clean the panels, or they will help to clean around the panels, but not necessarily be the electricians or the others who are part of the design and installation process? So those are things that will be coming out of this project. Gender policy for the Barbados Water Authority, and a gender focal point and committee at the Barbados Water Authority. And again, water and sanitation are listed under many of the Caribbean documents as being critical. And water is one of the more essential, well, if not one of the more, water is definitely one of the components when we think of environment that is extremely critical to the work that we do.
Gender equality and women's empowerment are critical to achieving sustainable development. With the continued impacts of climate change and economic crisis, research tells us it has become ever more critical to increase women's empowerment, which will have a multiplier effect for all of society: accelerated national and local economic growth, poverty reduction, and improved food security for communities and families.
I'll stick a pin there, but that's UN Women investing in food production for women. That and this other video is similar, but it talks about climate smart technologies or approaches for agriculture. One of the things that struck me in that video that we just saw was a woman with the can on her back, obviously going to spray either for pesticides or insecticides or fertilizer. I don't recall seeing protective gear. And so we think of environment, we need to think of also exposure and health impact. So great that we're investing and improving our food production so that we reach target, SDG 2 of zero hunger, improving women's livelihoods, but are we actually being exposed to more harmful chemicals? And I'll do the same with this video, because while it shows all of these different things, good health and well-being, responsible consumption and production, it actually shows one of the more pressing environmental issues of our time right now. So let me just play this one. I'll stop right there. And so the way we cook impacts our health. We talk a lot about water. Air pollution is just as major, if not. It's a serious problem around the world. Cook stoves, whether it's an open fire or other types of cook stoves that we might have in our homes, in our homes, tend to emit the air pollutants that have a serious impact on the health of our families. And so there's lots of innovation that is needed to actually reduce exposure to these types of particles that can reduce life. So I just wanted to show that here, that when we look at these wonderful videos of our Caribbean communities, we must also look at it as a way in which we identify women's exposure to environmental contaminants, because that inevitably impacts our health. And I'm coming there to the end now, and I'd just like to fast forward a little here, because I think something that seems to be missing, like we talk a lot about education and ICT and STEM, but we have some amazing teachers who are covering environmental studies at the CAPE level, who are studying green engineering, and the student-based assessments that their students have to do through the Caribbean Examinations Council provides opportunities to actually address environmental issues. I'm not sure if Fatima Patel, a teacher at Queen's College in Barbados, integrates gender into that, but those would definitely be ways in which a place where you can have broad impact year after year on students in this course. So
problem.
we just want to find. She takes her students into the sea. At the
Those Research Institute has been doing some coral restoration projects.
They do all of the scientific research in the scientific zone. They test for coral growth as well as water quality and other aspects of the reef.
I'm Fatima Patel, and I'm a teacher at Queen's College. I've been at Queen's College for about 15 years now, and I teach geography and environmental science.
How do I describe a class of Miss Patel? Miss Patel really knows how to speak to students and have them argue amongst themselves to find the best answer to a particular issue. No zones showed to be of very good quality at all. Even in terms of comparing them among themselves, they really didn't have very much difference. They were mostly dead.
I disagree. Okay. I don't know what I haven't been to a reef that's water is that healthy, so I can't say it was my first experience with it, but
I love that video. And these are all online, but Fatima jumps into that discussion and it encourages students that it's good to have debates. It's good to be critical thinkers, and that's what we need right now as we address many of our environmental challenges. And I have two more videos before I end. They're just a minute each. And I think there are organizations in the region that are really fighting the fight to protect our natural resources. I'll share one from Jamaica and one from Guyana. And I think, I'm not sure how the UN works, but I imagine that these are sensitive issues, especially when you have to work with governments and governmental agencies in creating these national reports, and whether there are opportunities, or how do organizations like the Jamaica Environmental Trust or the Amerindians People Association get to contribute the way in which they are addressing environment, and how women are engaging in that process. For both of these, there's strong female leadership for these organizations.
Jamaica, land of wood and water. That's Jamaica, once covered with lush forests and rivers with clean, clear water. But only a small fraction of our natural forest is still standing, and our water is becoming more and more polluted. But all is not lost. Clean, clear water flows underground deep in Jamaica's heartland, the cockpit country, rising as springs which flow into rivers, giving many people in the west of Jamaica their water. All these communities get their water from cockpit country, and all that water under cockpit country is covered and protected by Jamaica's largest remaining natural forest. Living in this fantastic forest are so many plants and animals. Many of them are found nowhere else in the world. Living around the forest are people. Cockpit country gives farming communities clean water and fertile soil to grow a lot of the food Jamaica eats. Cockpit country is where the Maroons fought the British and won. It's a symbol of resistance and triumph. Cockpit country is water. Cockpit country is people. Cockpit country is Jamaica's heartland. We must protect it.
Baba ya ubule marope, Baba ya ubule marope, Baba ya ubule marope, Baba ya ubule marope. Erivina bay, magvina bay, Erivina bay, magvina bay, Baba ya ubule marope. Baba ya ubule marope, Baba ya ubule marope, Baba ya ubule marope. Erivina bay, kamavina bay, Erivina bay, kamavina bay, Baba ya ugone karope, Baba ya ugone karope. Baba ya ugone garope, Baba ya ugone garope. Erivina bay, kamavina bay, Erivina bay.
I'll end on that one. It's from Guyana, a country, CARICOM nation that's about to produce oil, when very little is actually known about its marine resources. And our indigenous populations, this is something from the Amerindian Peoples Association, are fighting for their title of their land and fighting to protect the rainforests, which is some of the last remaining Amazonian rainforests in the world. So we'll open up to questions. I see LaFleur has a great one talking about the role of women, especially in poorer communities, for water collection, provision. Many times, if water is not piped into the home, they have to go a few distances, either to public standpipes. In some cases, I've seen where there are community tanks that women have to go to collect the water. And that in doing so, there are risks for being assaulted and by persons as they go to those places, and also risks for waterborne diseases. Those are very extremely great points to be made. And from the utility standpoint, I think the question becomes, what is, I think, a mechanism for addressing those issues, especially looking at water provision through a gendered lens? I could say, for the example from Barbados, that those are definitely things that are being discussed. Those are definitely one of the drivers for why they wanted to put, for this Green Climate Fund proposal, they want to actually put water storage tanks and be able to pay through the grant for them at households that are vulnerable, households with vulnerable persons. one of the issues there is that you do want at the household level to potentially have some sort of storage capacity. Now, it's an issue that you're a utility, right? You're supposed to be delivering water 100% of the time. Because your mains are leaky, because your groundwater levels are low, for all these different reasons, you're not meeting that requirement. And so you're actually going to give me a tank, connect it to your system so that when the pressure is high, my tank can fill. And then to keep the water quality in there good, I don't want to store it. I need to have a pump that continuously takes some of that and brings it into the house. That pump requires electricity. So my electricity bill is going to go up, right? And so utility comes back and says, well, maybe I can offset, and maybe we could put a little solar panel to help pump with that. So I think those are some of the discussions that are being had thanks to sort of experiences of, you know, persons who are going to be using systems like that. And I think that's something that more and more of our utilities need to address. I would say that with green climate funds, there's a large emphasis, and I think this may go with many of the other international financing organizations or institutions, that especially if it's a grant, that you're addressing needs of the most vulnerable. And so in a case like you just said, Le Fleur, there is definitely justification for addressing, you know, needs of most vulnerable, which in your case would be the women, head of households that are below a certain poverty line, where access to potable water at the residence is not something that can happen. I think the thing that we have to think of is how do we build civil society and civil society organizations so that they can actually hold our governments, utilities, funding agencies, the 5 Cs, the UN, whoever is getting these grants, accountable for those targets that they put in those documents that said will indicate that they're addressing gender in their proposals, right? So if anyone could go to the GCF site and read the Green Climate Fund action plan for the water sector resilience nexus, and it shows that, you know, not 50% women were certified in the capacity building exercise. They need to reach out to the partners, which includes me, the University of South Florida, and complain. But we also need to be accountable and make sure that information is shared and updated in many ways possible so that everyone can actually access them. So Lefleur is talking about management needs to be put through a gender lens for sure. There was just at the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association conference, and the incoming president, the president-elect this year was a woman who will be the youngest president for CWWA in 2020. Shade Jade Gavaya was elected last week. And Candace Santana, who is a vice president on the CWWA board, she is an engineer and organized a gender panel at the conference. And I made a comment that back up to 3 years ago, when my students and I, or my students mainly, were presenting on gender and infrastructure, or gender and mainstreaming in the water infrastructure in Barbados. Or when I made a comment that, you know, at a plenary that the entire panel was male, and we're talking about, you know, the provision of water. The experience of the conference for the next 2 or 3 years was one of being called a shark, one of, I wouldn't say hostility, but one that was not very pleasant. And so, yes, I was very pleased that this year Candace was able to put together a panel that addressed the mainstreaming in the water utility and in CWWA. And I think we're seeing a shift. I definitely think as more of these utilities, and many of them are going after green climate funds, many are going after other types of climate adaptation funding will have to address gender. I remember working with an engineer at the Barbados Water Authority, a female engineer, and we were talking about the gender and infrastructure certificate. And this was something that the UE is going to be developing, and we hope that they end up, really taking ownership of that and being able to offer it throughout the region and beyond. And I was telling her that, we should cover so that, different contractors and so on would be able to get the certificate. And she was saying, well, no, all you have to do is make sure that the terms of references state that the contractor has received or completed or shows competency in gender and infrastructure training. So sort of starting to change how our institutions work. So this would be the Caribbean Development Bank, the UN, start to require of our consultants, of our supply companies, which unfortunately right now still tend to be men. And we've been looking now at electricians, at plumbers. How are they trained? Who trains them? I've been meeting, I found, I think about 3 in Barbados who are electricians, and really trying to find out sort of how do we encourage more women to get into these fields, because they're quite, I wouldn't say you can earn a good living in those areas. And why are women not going into those things? Some things that have come up are, a lot of the work that you might be doing for water requires you now to get into the house. Even if you're not getting into the house, if you're laying mains, you're in somebody's community. Are people feeling safe, or they know when workers are there? And would it make a difference if women are somehow now taking part in that profession? I'm not sure the answer is about that, but I have thought of what does a female plumbing service look like? If majority of the women in the households are the ones who are having to call for services to address these things, are we actually seeing women participate? I think, so Nicole is saying, yes, definitely community health nurses and environmental health officers can ensure health issues are addressed effectively. So this could be the health issues either from water or health issues from the cook stove, as we saw from the video from Guyana. So for sure, and I think so. What we're from both comments from both LaFleur and Nicole, it's this opportunity or space to discuss the infrastructure around us with multiple partners so that we can address many issues that not only deal with sort of the environment, the provision of services, but also our health and well-being. And I'd say that those spaces are few and far between, but hopefully that is definitely something that we build. I normally do a little exercise. I did an exercise when I was at CWWA, the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association conference, and I like to do it a lot. It's sort of like if you're an engineer, have you ever had, a female engineering professor? And a few people will say yes. Say everybody stands and stretches, and have you had a female engineering professor? If not, sit. So, some will remain standing. Have you had a female professor who is from the Caribbean or of Caribbean descent? And by the time you get to that, only the young people and a few of them will remain standing. And so I think role models, representation is important. And there are ways in which we can look and search for those women who are teaching in engineering, in these fields that deal with the environment, to encourage others to get into this field. The underrepresentation is definitely something that needs to be addressed, and maybe it needs to be broadened. Something that was raised by a young engineer, I shouldn't say young, but an engineer who works with Sandals Resorts in Jamaica, was this issue of management. and that, you know, the management of the big utilities all tend to be men right now. And the management, and so I was asking, I was like, I wonder if at a smaller scale, you know, because many of our countries have packaged plants, let's say for wastewater treatment, some for water treatment, whether those have more senior management that is female. But I definitely think intervening in that way is critical. I'm actually in a leadership program right now for women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics for faculty members. And it's about, you know, how do you go beyond just being a professor? How do you start entering into leadership spaces within academia? I'm not sure the background of many of you on here is, but as a female engineering professor and teaching many female engineering students, for environmental engineering, we're definitely different, where we're seeing close to 50%, at least in the US, of our students, both undergraduate and graduate, being female. And we're approaching, you know, close to 50%, say at the assistant professor levels. As you go up the ranks to full professor, it's much less. But for those of us who are at the rank of full professor, it's how do we actually open a door so that others can come into this field, and so that others feel comfortable in this field, and others feel that, you know, work that makes them go to women in poorer communities to find out how our systems can serve them better is valuable work, that is the things that represents the things that will get us promoted, because those are the things that we're really interested in. And so I think you're seeing a change. I think my students right now, some are working in Barbados, are sort of showing how that can be done. So I think I went on and on there, but I don't think you all probably get a lot of perspectives from women in engineering. What it is to actually be in a classroom. This is not my experience, but for many in the civil and environmental engineering program at the University of the West Indies, the number of women in those classes is lower than the number of men. The number of female faculty is lower, and that does something to your psyche. And how do you actually get the women who are, you know, made it through those systems and who are in the profession? How do you train them to now become leaders in their organizations? And it's not just women. From working with the BWA, I'd also say that for many of the engineers there and so on, I think leadership training would be very valuable.
Thanks for that, Diane. I think the critical need of having women as well as the teachers and the students leading this is something that cannot be overstated, especially when you look at what's happening with regards to artificial intelligence. What people are recognizing is a lot of the prejudices that exist will be replicated in the algorithms or the programs and systems and products that are developed because of who is developing them. And this is not an overt malicious effort. It is just something that happens. And so when you have more diversity of perspective in the persons who are teaching and creating, you have more diversity of outcome in terms of your product. I'm not sure if you're seeing the comments from Eileen and Elaine.
I've seen the comments. I saw that, Elaine. I got that last week where I was told that Caribbean men in 10 years will be a dying species or something like that. And the person was saying that, you know, promotion needs to be on merit and not necessarily just to bring the numbers up and all this sort of stuff. And I personally feel at this point in time, you know, why don't we bring the numbers up and then discuss this? Because we've had such a long time where those numbers have not been present. So let's switch the script and instead put us at the table, put us in the programs, get the differing opinions. I also think with Melinda Gates, it was interesting that she's now putting $1 billion towards gender issues, and she made a comment that, you know, she was with this family and they were farming and lifting water and all this sort of stuff. And it's then she realized that a program they were running to get, you know, improved seeds weren't really getting to the women because the men were still in charge of distribution, and how critical women are in actually making something work or not. And I was just kind of chuckling and thinking, man, you really need to have some, like, you know, friends from the South or, you know, the Caribbean, or minority friends, because these things are kind of obvious to us. And women in the South have been, I find, doing a lot of leadership on these issues that are now becoming quite you know the word.
Well, they're now
Lost for the
being
word there.
noticed, but I think you know, what is interesting, and this goes for everyone across the region, is that this is something that UNIFEM and then UN Women has been saying for a very, very, very long time. So it's always interesting when other partners within the development community start to recognize things that we've been saying for a very long time, but then it also comes back to us to sit down and think, if we've been saying it for a very long time and we haven't been heard, that means we have to start changing the ways in which we say things so that we are actually being heard. Also, I think to Elaine's point, one of the things from the beginning of the sessions when we had Barbara Bailey was this notion of a men in crisis is actually not true. Even though women are getting more certification than men, men are still being paid more for same work. And men are still getting more opportunities in the industries that pay the most, like yours in STEM. So we have to look at equality, which is also not necessarily in the Beijing platform for action. Well, it does speak to the human rights of women, but absolutely as well in the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. You need temporary special measures to address inherent inequalities that are resulting in women and men still benefiting in very unequal ways from the economy. And
yeah, I would also say if you went into the data, and so I'm speaking for science, technology, and engineering and math fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you delved into the data on who is taking those subjects in the Caribbean region, and let's say at secondary school level, less than, with the exception of mathematics, which everyone has to take, less than 20% of the students enrolled in CSEC are taking those subjects. And whilst the ones enrolled, you might have, you know, equal or higher women enrolled. I can't remember the data. I haven't looked at it since 2015, I don't think. As you go further and further into university in those fields, especially engineering, the numbers of women or representation starts to decrease. So when we talk about women enrolled in universities and so on, we definitely need to look at the different fields that we're talking about. And yeah, people are using a lot that the women are coming out, you know, in the financial services, they're managing the systems, but in terms of utility management, they're not managing the utilities. And few are managing the departments. Actually, few in the engineering field or sciences field are managing those departments. I think also, let's say you have higher percentages in subjects like chemistry, which deals with water quality testing. How do we actually build those fields up so that those persons have employment? Who doesn't want to have their tap water tested, right? And how do we get that paid for? Why aren't we paying for it? That's how you start to build business. Business that could support women who are being trained in fields that could do those things. So on the school program, I left out a video, but in 2013, the Caribbean Science Foundation, the Caribbean Examinations Council, and Sagicor launched a program that I was involved in called the Sagicor Visionaries Challenge, which sort of said, is your school the best school in the country, in the world? No. Well, what would you do to improve it? Do you have you work with yourselves, the community, identify how you would improve it, show how you use the science, technology, engineering, and math, and sort of come up with a plan to implement or to design and implement that. And I think that the thought at the time was it would become the way in which you approach SBAs. So the and nearly so many of the problems addressed environmental issues. The students had problems with waste. They had problems with mosquitoes. So they were going to in Leon Hess School in St. Lucia. They had dengue that they went and surveyed the community. They surveyed the school and found they had a high incidence of dengue. So they wanted to deal with how water was dealt with on their campus in terms of collecting it. In terms of making sure it drained properly. They wanted to put certain plants in so that the mosquitoes wouldn't breed. Those are all things that we do in it, as environmental engineers and scientists. I think the question is sort of how do you translate that into something that is sustainable within the CXC curriculum so that you actually have support not just from community, but from others within the country and in the diaspora and elsewhere who can help a teacher guide those projects. Because what the teachers end up doing for the school-based assessments, not Fatima, who I showed in the video, is every student does the same project, and it's sort of, some just stay in the lab. And so it's not necessarily a project that responds to a need within your school, community, or country. And the needs that we have are very intricately linked with environment.
Thank you for that, Maya. And you're seeing everybody else's comments that speak.
Looking now. Yep.
Yeah. And while you look at them, I'm just going to do a little bit of a reminder, I want to really thank you for what you've done, which is being very pragmatic and specific with regards to the issue of women in the environment. Sometimes we speak about women in the environment and we're not able to really boil it down to the specifics around water, air pollution, what we're seeing with the greater impacts of climate change. And when you look at what the Beijing Platform for Action speaks to on women and the environment, which goes from page 103 to page 107 or 8, they say specifically the kinds of actions that government should be looking to take, that non-governmental organizations in the private sector should be looking to take around the environment. And it is, not only ensuring that women are involved in the decision-making aspects of it, and that they have greater access to information and education around science, technology, and economics, but then also looking at what the hazards are at home. And that example you gave for us with regards to school, workplaces, what's happening in your local community. And when you're taking gender into consideration, then you're designing projects that address these issues. So there's some very clear areas where they have indicated specific actions to be taken. And what's going to be very interesting and critical for the Caribbean delegations is to make sure that when we're thinking about these negotiations, we're looking at how have we measured up when it comes to the measures that are gender responsive around environmental planning. How have we measured up with regards to the structural links between gender, the environment, and development, specifically with sectors like agriculture, fisheries, forestry, biological diversity, climate, and water resources and sanitation, like you've been speaking to. So these are the kinds of information. This is the kind of information that our colleagues need to be ensuring that they have, so that when they're negotiating, especially from countries that are small island developing states, we're negotiating from a position where we know where we have come, we know what the gaps are, and we know where we still need to go. And I think you've really been able to demonstrate this through specific women and girls and people from the Caribbean stories of their experiences with these kinds of issues.
So I saw Michelle, women learn and men earn. That is the truth. I don't know how to deal with that one. I experience that too. But I would say maybe we need, especially for the environmental organizations that are led by women, maybe we need some financial training or assistance. Maybe it is that grants that go to those organizations actually have some type of support for the financial side of things. because many times they're not charging overhead, and they're just working kind of differently. And so how do you actually make them a little more financially secure? I speak from experience of working with NGOs in Belize, in Barbados, in Guyana.
Yes, Maya, I know we are probably about to wrap up now, but I feel that due to when we're talking about women learn and men earn, that was a quote I had gotten from Rhoda Ruddock. Just a bit much for me. I'm listening on a tablet, so it was a bit much to write. But the point about maybe women need to be thinking in terms of how they are socialized to believe that in the care economy and unpaid work. And so many things that women do, myself included, I know you yourself included, we do it as an extension of what are the gendered expectations of us as women. So the programs that we may be working in, for example, we are looking at working with the water and the river and to do community monitoring. Many women would just volunteer themselves, and they make sure that and they bring lunch and they make sure everything is taken care of in that kind of way, just as an extension of what we do as women in the home or what we're expected to do. So I think those are where some of that come from. And so we don't really see the value and many of the ways how women interact with issues of water, even issues of sanitation, even issues is as caregivers, as opposed to users and being custodians of these natural resources. So there are many women who are working in this field. However, they are almost invisible, just like women in care work, right? So it's unpaid, and it's just something that they are kind of relegated to do. Thank you.
No, I totally agree with you on that one, Michelle. And I mean, it's sort of, so as a caregiver, the water isn't flowing, you have to buy a bucket and fill the water up. But that bucket cost is coming, you're paying for it. Some people might be putting a filter on, they might be boiling the water. Those are all costs that you are bearing, and a utility or the provider is not having to bear that cost. And the question is, how do we actually not do that in the future? And they're possibly, I think that the first part is recognizing that issue and then starting to intervene. In terms of, I could think of the student entrepreneur as the SEED program. So it's a student entrepreneurial program at the University of West Indies in Barbados, led by Ayana Young Marshall. And I've been able to see some of the presentations from the students coming through there, and seeing that many of the women are turning that caring business, that caring thing that we do, into actual businesses also. So I think that's another way to go, right? How do we actually start building the small business economy so that we are charging or being paid for the work that we do?
I think also that more women need to be certified in project management so that they can take lead positions. It's good to do the scientific subjects, both at school or at the tertiary level. But as women in NGOs, if we really want to see the change that we're looking for, we too need to step up. Wherever additional training is available, take that training. That will equip us with the necessary management skills. It is very, very important. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Very much agree.
Nicole also raised that we should look at the women in the community who have the historical knowledge and skills and train them to be more efficient and earn a substantial living. And this is also a critical part of the work, is the part about the invisibility. We're now starting a lot of talk about organic farming and climate smart and climate resilience funding, and a lot of this looks a lot like what indigenous communities were doing before and what some of our older communities and colleagues have been doing before. So it is also, how do we tell our stories and their story, allow them to tell their stories in a way that starts to influence how we function. That's something that also needs to be thought about. So thanks for that point, Nicole.
I would, to add to that, Tani, I would also say, how do we pay those women and men for that historical knowledge that they will share with us? Because we don't necessarily do that right now. But it's valuable, and their time and their knowledge should be compensated for. We don't necessarily, we have to figure out how to do it and do it better. And have them not just tell the stories, but then to become sort of the community leaders and champions for that, or on those things, not just, then could be regional also. On the agriculture sector, I wanted to mention another really innovative group coming out of Trinidad and Tobago called Y Farm, that's led by this guy, Alpha Senon. But he has, I know my graduate student, Winella Isaacs, is integral in that program that they're running to get little kids and communities interested in agriculture. So they've created a comic book called Agri Man, and I think from conversations with Manila, they're coming out with one with a representation for a female champion in agriculture also, along with other different superheroes for agriculture. But they're also going into schools, and they just did a program called the Agripreneur Program, and I saw great representation, both men and women participating in that, and that was held in Trinidad and Tobago. So young people, I think, are definitely showing new ways to also innovate in this space as we start to talk about food security.
Thank you for that, Maya. That's a very good example to know about. And a good point. We do need to look at how people are compensated for their time.
Yeah, I see Nicole is bringing this question up again. I mean, I think it's to have a conversation with the lenders in the region, to have a conversation with them so that when they are developing their terms of references, that they understand that there needs to be fees for consultations if it makes sense, right? So that's something that could be raised. Even governments. I had a story. I was in Guyana one time, and there was this guy who was working at the water utility for long, and the banks were funding some new groundwater wells in a community that was self-sufficient on rainwater. And the fella who I was talking to said when the consultants came, to try and find where the groundwater was, they were, they hit a place, there was no groundwater there, and then he recalled and told them where they should go and dig. And of course, that's where the plant is now. And I was just like, how much thousands or millions in Guyana dollars did you save this company? And obviously not compensated for any of that information that you shared with them, So on the question of sort of project management and building up organizations in the region that are led by women, Tani, I know there's been some training on this, I think if not from your organization, but from others. But are there any organizations that sort of offer this service to smaller groups? let's say I can help with the budgeting, help with the project all these different things, but I would serve multiple different environmental organizations. Or is there a resource where environmental organizations led by women, is there a platform that they could even work in? Because I find we have these champions, one in each country or a few in each country, and they're not really or never have really all met in one place, and their struggles are very much the same.
So UNDP and especially Jeff program would have been doing that work, as well as CPDC. They had been doing a lot of work to try and create and strengthen these networks of women, and not just women, of NGOs across the Caribbean working on these issues. The sustainability and the impact of these trainings, I haven't seen any documentation outlining what they've been, but I think this is a point that should be flagged as not only for our immediate action, but also as a negotiating point, that this is something that we need to ensure that the development community and governments are supporting.
And something that also, I guess, a question, how can women and the environment be linked with Caribbean women or organizations that are, in the diaspora? And how can governments play a role, or should they play a role in helping to support that linkage?
I think that it is important, and that's something that we're all trying to work to. And I see Nicole Aline has talked about Barbados 2020, where the Prime Minister has invited the diaspora to come back. But I do think that we need to, we have to also look, because when mappings have been done, there are not a lot of organizations that look at women in the environment or gender in the environment. Most of the organizations or NGOs within the women's movement in the Caribbean are based on violence against women services and advocacy. So there are a lot of people. So when it comes to registered organizations, and Nicole, that's the difference, thanks. Registered organizations that can work with certain groups, you don't find them at that level. And even the grassroots organizations that do exist, they're not necessarily focused on gender in the environment or women in the environment. They're focused on specific environmental areas. So the cross section, you don't get that cross section as often as you would like. There is a woman in Antigua doing fantastic work that we know about. Of course, there are organizations in Trinidad and Tobago that we are aware about. Women in the fisheries in Barbados, but it's not necessarily, they're not as engaged in a lot of the women's movement actions because of the kind of organizations they are. Yes, of course, Canary is a regional organization as well doing the work, but they also, and we are in touch with Canary, they're also, their gender work is not as integrated as well into the work that they do on the ground. But we're hoping to partner with them to strengthen that focus.
Yeah, I think it's been extremely fruitful for me as an engineer to work with folks at the IGDS. And also my sister is a gender specialist. And interestingly, I was Googling, floods in Guyana and found a video I had made when it happened in 2005, and then found a paper that she had from 2010 speaking about the experience of an NGO there called Red Thread, and how during the disaster, women connected across all sorts of landscapes and different types of boundaries to address recovery from disaster. And this was 2005. And I think it's interesting because my sister and I don't necessarily work together we work on a disaster or something hits, and I respond with the website and information, and then she does, the NGO gender reflection. But when you look at the work that we're doing, we're actually really similar. And to put us in the same room to have that discussion is something that I think would be fruitful. And then, we did that at CGAD this year, where we both sat in on each other's sessions. And it's about mixing the disciplines along with having input from women from across the Caribbean region who are working in, women and men, working in all different areas to have discussions on our environment and our safety and our health. So I think there definitely, there's Canary, there's Global Water Partnership led by a woman,
I think it's a critical area that we need to start addressing. It just we have not been as successful as I think we could have been in making some of these interlinkages and recognizing the synergies. Even at the governmental level, sometimes you see very big silos between the work that is being done in the environment and climate change and then what's being done in the institutional mechanisms for gender equality. Because they're not necessarily seeing the synergies, but they're very clear synergies that we have to work on. And we're trying our best to do that on UN Women through the partnerships with other UN agencies on the Engender project, as well as what will soon be implemented in the Caribbean around the Trust Fund for Human Security. We'll be looking much more at this and how we can ensure that these organizations are engaged. I'm seeing Terry said several youth and women-led environmental organizations need capacity strengthening. The sustainable component of the work being done needs strengthening. And then Adele said there's a group in Guyana called Women in the Environment. And Elaine said, I agree about mixing the disciplines. We can no longer keep the silos, whether in government or NGO. Absolutely. We have to start mixing. The issue also is where are donor funds? And this is something that we have to really look at honestly in the Caribbean, is that a lot of our organizations are not necessarily led, but supported by where the donor funding priorities are. And a lot of the donor funding priorities right now and for a long time have been around violence against women as a theme, as well as a few other areas. But while they also have been on climate change and environment, it has not been on the cross-section of climate change and the environment, as well as gender equality. So this is something that we need to look at. And I think Terry's point about that sustainability issue is extremely, extremely poignant and relevant. So Maya, do you have any last words before we go?
No, I'd say thank you for this. Contact information is there. Would be interested in engaging in any way. Thanks for hosting this. I've learned a lot. And I hope that really with these projects that are coming through, that we really hold people accountable to what they put in terms of their gender action plans. And that we also look for the spaces where we can actually be on the ground in with multiple different representations to actually address some of our issues. So I think we need to find the spaces that allow us to work in our communities or with communities and bring all of our skill sets to the table.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I also think that yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm seeing comments from Elaine and Terry. Castara Group in Tobago has done tremendous work, and the Climate Fund has a gender equality requirement. It does, but I do want us to also, and this is critical for the negotiations as well as for considerations that all of the national gender machinery should be thinking about as well. How many of you have been engaged in the development of the Climate Fund projects, in the GCF projects? How many of you are engaged in either the development, the implementation of these projects, so that you know what the gender strategy has been? Because a lot of the gender work is how many women, how many men will be affected, which is actually not really gender inclusive or responsive in terms of a project. That's just getting down to sex segregation in terms of your impact, or not even impact, who's going to be engaged. How many of the gender bureaus are integrated really into these kinds of proposals, as well as the implementation when these proposals are successful? And that's something that I think we need to address quite clearly, because there's a critical role that each of you have to play, as well as the understanding of when we have groups like national organizations of women. So you have an umbrella organization, because an agency like any UN agency or international development agency is not going to be able to have access to all of the different groups, whether they be community-based organizations or NGOs. Who is getting the opportunity to engage even at the local, national, and regional level with the umbrella organizations? Because generally, organizations like the United Nations or any other development agency would then be dealing with that umbrella group to get access to other groups, right? And so if they are not even at that stage, it's going to be difficult for them to be found, unless we are like in the Caribbean, where we're smaller communities and we can figure these things out. So this is also something that we need to look at in terms of how we organize as women's movements in the region and globally. Yeah. I really want to thank Dr. Trotz again for her time and her energy, and a lot of time this morning trying to ensure that the videos played properly and everything was as it should be. It was a really informative and interesting session. And I hope that all of the participants feel now that they have real evidence of programs and persons' experiences on the ground to be able to inform negotiating positions moving from here, not just negotiating positions, but programming and policy positions that need to be contemplated moving forward when we talk about women in the environment or gender equality in the environment. So thank you very, very much, Maya, for your time.
Thanks, Tony.
And everyone, thank you again for joining us today. As you know, it's a 6-part series, and tomorrow at 11 o'clock we will be looking at women and the media with Sharon Carter Burke.